Welcome to the Strength Coach Experience podcast. I'm your host, Joe Lego, and here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Strength Coach Experience, episode 24. Today, I want to welcome Tony Ricci. I had the pleasure of actually being in Tony's class. He was my professor in college, awesome person. Tony he's been in strength and conditioning for a number of years, mainly in fight sports, but not limited to. Also, he's a professor involved in nutrition and soon to be part of the psychology department there at Nova Southeastern in Florida. Tony, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I really appreciate you being here.
You know, Joe, it's nice to see you, my friend, and you were a wonderful student. I was proud of you. You did fantastic. So it's good to be reunited now and watch you have a great deal of success in our industry. This is fun.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said, and it all started in those classes, when I was at school. Right. So why don't we open up with, your background, just growing up and stuff like that, and how you kind of got into the fight sport game and nutrition, and then we'll just kind of piggyback from there.
Sure. I was lucky. The era that I grew up in was a great boxing era, Joe. So my dad was born in Italy and then came to the United States. And you pretty much got, acquainted with two sports. Baseball, he's from Italy, he's Italian. So what's he going to do? Go to Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, right? Become a Yankee fan. And he was a big boxing fan. So boxing was very big in my house, and my dad actually did a little bit of it himself and sparred around and got to watch great fighters such as Sugar Ray Robinson. But then I grew up. Now, I must say that I was very young during Ali's career, right? And I saw his later years, but I grew up in an era where you could watch boxing on TV, no different than a football game.
Yeah, my dad used to talk about that all the time.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, Saturday night, Friday night fights, and everyone on a Saturday, we'd be ready for Ali Frazier. That was the big event, and you'd turn it on. And then after those great heavyweight years with Ali, Frazier, Foreman, Larry Holmes, of course, we had the wonderful middleweight years, which Leonard, Duran, Hagler, and of course, Tom Hearns. So boxing was really big. And the other thing that got me very into fight sports is when I was young too, the Olympics were very much based in the traditional sports. You didn't see all the wild stuff you see today, right? Yeah. So you saw weightlifting. You saw a lot of wrestling. Wrestling was as popular now as you would see swimming. Okay, United States versus Russia back then, very popular. So, and in addition to that, boxing was huge in the Olympics. So fight sports became a love at an early age. And then I began doing a little bit of the boxing and judo and jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu, before Brazilian jiu-jitsu became big. And I fell in love with those sports. And as a result of that, always trained and took a course where I say a course in my life's direction. Like at an early age, I was becoming an exercise physiology major, and in one of the first programs that ever had it. So when I was young, people would go to college and not for things like exercise phys. It was brand new. So everybody would say, well, you're doing a physical education and stuff like that. I'm like, no, exercise physiology is something different. And from there on in, I went to school for many years, numerous different degrees, stayed in strength and conditioning. And I've studied everything from nutrition to sports science to sports psychology. And that's where my career has come. And I get the fortune to teach and coach and spend time with a lot of great people. Yeah.
No, those are the heydays. Like I said, my dad follows boxing, and he used to talk about how on Saturday everybody would watch it. It wasn't on pay-per-view. And you had Ali, you had all those middleweights. Exactly. You had the fighter with Mark Wahlberg. Based on the brothers, and then you moved right into Tyson.
Arturo Gatti, yes.
Exactly. So no, I remember hearing about those times because now it starts at 12 o'clock and they charge $700. So
it's changed quite
exactly. So it's not as, but I remember hearing about that stuff, and even when I was younger, when Tyson was coming up before he took a massive dive, we used to watch it at my house as well.
Exactly.
And then now nobody knows who anybody is and everything else. So
it's changed, unfortunately. You're right. It's not as popular, and it's a wonderful sport. Boxing is a fantastic sport.
yeah, no, I hope it, like I said, I hope it doesn't, get affected by anything. But like I said, I think people are going more towards what we'll talk about, the MMA side now, just because of that dynamic. So I just want to go back a little bit. When you were coming up, you talked about fighting, involved in boxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu. Before you decided to go to school for exercise phys and those things, were you in a weight room? Did you have somebody to teach you exercises or anything like that? Or was it something you got into once you went into college?
Really, really great question, because we were kind of exploring. So we had access to some knowledge, but it wasn't great, right? Where you would go buy a magazine and maybe watch Arnold, look at pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Colombo, literally. Or you would get some insight occasionally, believe it or not, into what the Russians were doing. Okay, we were hearing about these things called plyometrics in the mid to late 70s, right? And then Olympic weightlifting and how they were utilizing it for sports performance. So to be honest, what we would get, Joe, is kind of these leaks, and I worked out in a gym which was called RABS, which was for Richie A. Barathay, where I also trained American combat karate. It was pretty good style for its day. But nevertheless, we had a lot of pro football players in there. And I used to work out with a guy named Lyle Alzado.
Oh, yeah.
Who passed away, a brain tumor. And Lyle, though, was from that area locally. But I remember him giving me or showing me the strength program for the Seattle Seahawks, despite the fact that he didn't play for them. And we started this again, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And we're starting to get dribs and drabs of different bits of information. And what happened in about the early 80s was the National Strength and Conditioning Association was formed. And they were bringing over a lot of the stuff and strength training that came from Russia. So Eastern Bloc nation. So the point to that is we were kind of digging and we were getting some bodybuilding. We would hear a good power lifter, then we'd do what they said. We were getting information from professional football players, and then NSCA comes and we're reading some papers by Angel Spazov from Bulgaria. So we were really exploring. We didn't really know what we were doing. I recall squatting Monday through Friday one time and worrying that if I didn't squat on Saturday and Sunday, I was going to get weaker. So that's kind of where we were in those days.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot, but I think it seems like a funner time, because in relation to now, and I always say this, I think it's hilarious. We do all this stuff, right? All this great, wonderful science. And we always go back to Russia anyway. We have all these sensors, all these movements, but at the end of the day, the Eastern Bloc stuff, the stuff they did in the 60s, regardless of the steroids and the performance enhancing stuff, is still what they use today, right? You brought up plyometrics with the Chinese jumping out of holes full of water and all those different things. And,
Totally.
Forshansky and all that stuff. And I think it's always, crazy how that people really don't realize even if, either you grew up in it or you go into it, but, the stuff that they did was groundbreaking and we still use it today.
That's right.
The accessory lifts and all that stuff is great, but like the band training, the chains, the, overspeed eccentric stuff, all that stuff's amazing. And I always just love hearing about that stuff because if I feel like every time we try to get away from the Russian block training and all the stuff they did over there, we always come back to it, or it always has to be a staple.
You said it perfectly. There are things we could do that augment that, right? But it is foundational. And I think what science does now is very effectively for all of us explain what they were doing and why it is, to your point, foundational. We tend to think, devices are new. We create a couple of new movements, but let's be honest, any particular biomechanical application, any range of motion, any movement we're creating, somebody in the history of humans did it before. Somebody being chased by a saber-toothed tiger 50,000 years ago probably did everything that's done in a CrossFit competition in 15 seconds to get away from that thing, okay? And obviously I'm exaggerating by a saber-tooth because they weren't there. But my point to that is, I've always said that training is somewhat like music, and I'm not a musical expert, but from my friends that are, you really don't create new notes, right? The notes are there. Now, there are different permutations of those notes, but all you do is change the order of the notes and the timing between them, and you have a new song. In many ways, that's what training is. We can change the orders. We can put certain movements before the others. We can do a loaded movement, unloaded, a post-activation, for example. We could do, sometimes what I do is almost call it a reverse PAP, where you unload and load, because in contact sports or fight sports, you start unloaded and then go maybe potentially to loaded, right? So my point to this is we just have a whole bunch of resources available, but they are based upon foundational principles that have been established for about 40 to 50 years. Now we have great tools and they explain better why those principles work.
Yeah, no, I think it's great that you compared it to music. I always say the coach is kind of like the conductor, trying to kind of flow the notes together. But it's true. We all have the same database. My last podcast, and it's come up a little bit. We always talk about why strength and conditioning and training is so secretive, right? Everybody wants to keep their special formula to themselves, when in reality, everybody uses their same exercises, the same movements. It's just, we put them in a different place. And, I brought it up before too. It's not about the exercises. It's how you order them. It's how you present them. It's how you get the athlete ready to do the exercise, right? What kind of energy needs to go into those? And like I said, I think that's something that this whole secrecy thing, I never understood, right? And then we talk about the unloading and loading. In basic of sport, we all have the same exercises, and the best teacher to find out what we have to do to train is watching the sport. I talked to another strength coach, and he said, I could go to a soccer game, and the guy sitting next to me who's not a strength coach could tell me more about the sport if I just said, what is he doing? And he could describe what's going on, and then we can relate that. And I think, all these great tools, the research is fantastic, but I think one of the things that gets in the way is people try to overdo it. They try to do too much, when in reality, you're just trying to get them better at the movements, and your expertise comes with the presentation, the arrangement of the notes, as you talked about, and how, the intensities and different things that you can help increase and decrease in a closed environment like a gym.
I think you hit on some great points. First, I love in sports psychology, which I have a doctorate in sports psychology and motor learning. So I've done a study there. What is the first thing we say? Immerse, what you said, Joe, immerse yourself in the sport, right? Because the psychology of a linebacker, if you want to enhance mental performance, it's completely different than that of a golfer, right? So therefore, you have to know the context and how to augment the mental performance, how to regulate anxiety, attention. It differs. And what we have is some choices. So for example, in fight sports, I have 10 tools, hypothetically, and the 5 I choose are contingent upon what that athlete may need most. That's all. The tools are already there. If I have a stand-up fighter that has never done anything in grappling or jiu-jitsu work, or utilizing absolute strength, or working against the load of another person, okay, so then we're going to utilize strength protocols that may better familiarize them with that, right? If I have a wrestler who's never spent extensive period or time on their feet, well, then we may do reactive agility work and footwork drills and explosive style work that helps them to do that. The principles are pretty much the same. The selection varies simply, to your point, according to the need, right? All in fighting, I always say that all fighters need the same qualities, but they don't possess the same qualities equally. It could be genetic, or it could be through their training discipline. So what we do is we try to match up the best performance, strength, or power, or speed protocols with their needs. That's what we can do. And it is done, to your point, in complete collaboration with the skills coach. Because they're going to tell you, hey, you know what? This guy's really good. This woman is excellent. She's a little delayed in how she responds to A, B, and C. Is there something we can do to improve that physically or mentally? And then you work with them, in concert in order to try to improve those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question. Just, I thought of it as you're talking about it. So we talk about immersion, right? Which is very important to help build those patterns and even introduce new patterns. If you have a fighter coming into a gym and say he's very good at stand-up and he's good at, let's say submissions, but he's not good at the takedown part or different variations, would you then immerse somebody in the things that they're not good at and kind of go away from the things that they've mastered, so to speak, when you first train them?
You're talking from a performance
Yeah, from a
perspective?
performance
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
Well, I think to an extent, right? So I think here's something also that we can consider, Joe. We're coaching and we're building biomotor qualities, right? But we'll also have the ability to build confidence in their ability to execute a given skill. So, for example, I'll use an analogy where I got a great stand-up fighter and they're recent to jiu-jitsu and they're a little uncomfortable on the ground. Well, it's not going to solve everything by any means, but I might be doing a lot of horizontal hip thrusts. I might be doing a lot of movements that require palpitation so they get a better sense of feel, right? Of tactile cueing. I might put them, like I said, in a hip thrust on their back so that we can build some confidence and say, hey, we're going to build this position. We're going to get you stronger from here. We're going to get you more powerful from here. This way, when you learn that skill set and how to get out from being mounted, we'll have the qualities there. So I don't say that we would take a program, Joe, and build it exclusively around their weakness, but I do think we have that ability as coaches to not just build the physical quality, but really translate it to their skill and help breed confidence. Because if they're a new fighter, not new fighter, but if they're transitioning from stand-up, now they're going to MMA and they're on the ground. They got 9 people yelling 8 different cues at them at one time. Okay, well, they got somebody competent on top of them. There's a lot of things to think about. We got them in a situation that's a little bit more calm, where they can focus some attention and utilize, like a motor imagery, for example. Coach taught them, here's one way that we can explode out of the mount, all right? We do the hip thrust, we apply that movement, and we connect it to that particular skill set. See, that's what's cool. I like to make sure that my fighter knows this is not a hip thrust. This is applied to what may happen in a fight. When we are doing a hex bar deadlift, when you're driving that force through the ground, you're driving your right leg through the ground, hypothetically, so that you can throw the punch harder or whatever they wish to see. My point to that is, yeah, if I talk to the skills coach and they don't have confidence there and they don't have the qualities or the strength or the tactile awareness when they are being taken down because they were a stand-up fighter, well, certainly we can do movements that not only build the physical requirements to improve their ability there, but their mental ability. At least breed some confidence. Hey, you've had people on, you're good. Boom. Now we've got 300 pounds on your hip thrust, explode. We can launch the guy. So there's really, I think, a lot more that we can do than just saying, all right, we hit the stretch shortening cycle. We got you stronger. We increased rate of force development. We have to let them know what we did and why it matters to them too.
Yeah, I think that's I completely agree. Anybody out there listening, I think Tony just hit the fundamentals of what we try to do on the head. And I love how you talk about if somebody is uncomfortable, let's say on their back, you give them an exercise that is not only going to help them improve that skill, but it's going to give them confidence in something that they're a little shaky about. I think that's a great thing because that's what we're trying to do, right? And when they get in the octagon or in the ring, you can't be there with them telling them anything. So I think it's great to build those patterns that will help them directly there. And I also think it's great, as you're adding things and adding exercises to their menu, if you will, you're slowly helping them in those skills that they're struggling with.
Exactly. That's coaching, right, Joe?
Exactly. And the what may happen, right? That's the other thing, right? We're getting them prepared for what they're doing. And I also like how you talk about, because I used it in baseball, when they trap our deadlift, let's just say for baseball, right? I would always say it's a load and a go. What do you do when you swing? You load, you shift your weight, and then you go. That's how we're going to trap our deadlift. What do you do when you pitch? We load and go, right? Because we're trying to tell the body how we're going to move. So same thing in fighting.
Yes. And I think it's wonderful because it broadens our capacities as coaches. Great football coaches appear not only, most of the people have pretty good skill, but what are those football coaches? All right, you got a Patrick Mahomes, right? I could probably coach him. The guy's a freak, right? He can do anything. But you've got quarterbacks that have been well coached as an example because that coach puts him in the right place. They look at some details. Okay, they look at their arm slot, but they don't just look at their arm slot. They look at the timing of the arm slot, improving their ability to know they can throw the ball effectively if we do A, B, C. Maybe they look and work on something that the athlete is not confident in to build that ability. So I think what's so great about our discipline is that we have the capacity to expand well beyond just the physical and train it. And I love the way you were connecting that imagery and, motor imagery and the visualization, some people use that term, of a hex bar deadlift, inevitably to the pitch, inevitably to the swing. That's what it's for. It's, it's not a lift, it's a lift, but the end product is not a lift. It's a swing, right?
Of course. And I think that, for a lot of years in the middle there, you talk about, in the younger years or of strength conditioning in the infinite years, everybody just kind of took it and understood it as a weight coach. I have a great story from somebody who's on my podcast on 7. His name is Ken Contour. He worked with the NSCA. He told me the first time he met Arnold Schwarzenegger, they went to a thing for the Special Olympics to teach Olympic lifts and have things in there. And Arnold goes, "Oh, we're going to take the weights off the barbell. Let's have the dumbbell coaches come and take the barbell, the stuff off there." And I think that, not that that's good or bad, but I think it kind of explains how the error is, right? Everybody thinks it was just the weights, and that's not it at all. You're changing their lives. You're changing patterns.
Right.
We're trying to teach them, what to do all the time. And I think that, people still think it's just the weights, and those are things that we have to get away from, because I think it limits our capacity, if you will, right? If I can change how you think when you go outside the gym, build your confidence, and get you to remember what I taught you 6-7 years down the road, even if we're not in sports anymore, I think that's a lot more important than just moving weights around. Absolutely.
Strength is wonderful. And there was a philosophy, strength solves all. Strength of mind solves all. What good is it if you really don't understand the application and believe that it's made improvement in your abilities, right? So I always say what we do, we build the better qualities, we build the confidence, so the athlete becomes a better learner, and they learn quickly and they can apply the skill more quickly and effectively. That's our job. If they're learning various skills in jiu-jitsu, and they now know they have the strength, they have a little bit more of the speed and the mobility to execute the skill, which may not have been there before, then we've helped not only get them through that, but maybe what we're doing, and it's my hope always, is we're expediting skill acquisition. We're not the skill coach, but we're putting all the tools together and slightly helping the athlete mentally, so that when that skill is to be applied by a very well disciplined or very well accomplished skill coach, we put in place a bunch of qualities that shortens the time it takes for them to really master that skill. That's my hope. So I work with Ray Longo. Ray's the skill coach. I want to just try to build a body that responds, of movement efficiency, of course, muscle elasticity, have everything working, so that if he does want to do a knee in a certain fashion, or a rear leg kick in a certain fashion, or a jab, all of the physical components are more inclined to be optimized, so that skill can immediately be applied effectively. That's a big part of what we do.
Yeah, no, skill transition, I think, is the biggest thing that we do that's kind of swept under the rug. A lot of people, you have strength coaches, they don't go to practice and watch their athletes. They're never, out on the field. And I think that takes away, because if you don't know what they're doing out on the field or what their discrepancies are, then we can't train them. And I used to use it in speed, right? I think speed training is fantastic. But one of the big problems I saw, especially in college and early on, is we would have these hour sessions just based on hurdles, right? Based on teaching different steps, the forward leans, being able to get your feet under you, being able to create, force in a small amount of time. But then you'd go to practice, they would do a drill where they run down first base, and it looks like somebody's shooting at them with a gun from behind. And I'm like, wait a second. And nothing against the athlete, but people have to remember, we talk about the neuroscience part and the psychology. They've been swinging a bat and running down first base for as long as they can possibly remember.
That's right.
So 1 hour twice a week of you having them run over hurdles and cueing them is not going to change what happens at the end of that swing. we have to completely break down the entire thing now, because that whole swing at a pitch, drop the bat, turn towards the base, take off, that's the whole pattern.
Yeah.
So if they're running straight off of first to second, we might see some changes. But for the most part, you have to, like I said, I love how you talk about, making the skills better, whatever you can do to improve the skills, but you're not going to get that by watching, you have to watch the athletes in practice. And I think, that was the biggest thing always in baseball. I'm like, why are we teaching speed this way? Why are we teaching it the way that it's mapped out in this, in a program? Because we need to get them faster in the game. If they're 40 time or 60 time, which that's another conversation, goes from what I'm doing, but they still run from, home plate to first base and it's terrible. Or when they swipe first to second, their jumps are brutal. We're not doing anything. We're just, looks nice.
Exactly right. And so again, it isn't as if we're replacing the skill, but we're looking at the biomechanics as an example. In other sports, it might be the biomechanics and the bioenergetics, but the biomechanics of how that could potentially be optimized, and therefore creating performance protocols that, are going to be more inclined to augment that, right? So, I mean, how much vertical propulsion am I going to do as an example, with utilizing that as an example for that athlete, if very little of what they do from the sprinting standpoint, right, it's almost all horizontal propulsion. So that's just an analogy, not that an athlete would have needed a third baseman can jump. But to your point, understanding, watching the sport, becoming immersed in it, doesn't mean that you discount some foundational principles that help the athlete get stronger and faster. But it means you may find ways to better augment or maybe even correct mechanical deficiencies that are impeding that, right? Their ability to get to first faster. I might have excessive lateral rotation or knee valgus, and nobody's really addressed that. So by immersing ourselves in the sport and the athlete, it builds a little bit upon what it is we can do in our career. And I like that. I don't want to just, I gave up coaching somebody through a deadlift in my 20s,
Yeah, no, of course.
It's very easy to do compared to other things.
Yeah, no, that's where I think the skill isn't seen with the deadlift and the squat. And I think that's still something that's a stigma is, oh, you teach people how to deadlift and squat. And no, that's not the point. The point is, like you said, being able to put them in exercises that can dictate where their propulsion goes, horizontally, rotationally, where that torque is, and all those different things. So I think one of the things is, it needs to be, the coaches need to make sure that we're always offering those type of skills or offering that type of training, because that way more people will know what we're actually doing, because a lot of times you see all these schools, in their deadlift, squat, power clean, push press, done. And those are great exercises, but whether or not you have to be able to see the other stuff, what are they doing? Why are they doing this with a band? Why are they using this specific exercise, to give people more of an insight into, kind of what we do. And I don't think that's marketed as well, right? Everybody wants to see the Led Zeppelin with the 600-pound deadlift and the band things before that, the bridges or those different things to help with the deadlift, or why we're using a deadlift with, let's say, a football player. And the explanations of that are kind of few and far between.
Right. No, really nicely stated, Joe. And look, in defense of many coaches, right, it's hard sometimes because you and I are talking about looking at the finer points, but I don't have 50 athletes. So, I can do that. And I don't want 50 athletes because I don't have the ability, and I concede that, to effectively scale protocols amongst that many athletes. So sometimes, it's a program, you got 30 kids. All right, you're going to do some deads, you're going to do some push press, and you're going to kind of scale it. And you're going to throw in some broads and vertical jumps, and there's your program, right? That's better than nothing. So I understand that in some cases, very hard when you're the only coach of 50 athletes to get the finer points. But as you get to the elite level and you want to make those small differences in performance, I do think what we're discussing now becomes important, or certainly becomes beneficial. How do we get 1/10 more power, speed, add a little bit something to someone's jab? How do you get them to get just a half a step down the first base line? Change direction just a touch quicker, with greater intent in NFL in a slant route. So these are little things that we can help and certainly do at the elite level. But as I said, sometimes it is hard because if you're a high school strength coach and you're by yourself and you got the whole team, you don't always get to do all these fine points, you know?
Yeah, no, of course. And I think what it brings out to light is we need more people, because this thing of there's a head strength coach, and either you have a head strength coach and 2 assistants or just the guy by itself, and I feel like the chief thing should be you need more staff so that the kids are better, and I think we talk about the skills coach stuff. I think the new kind of trend, which I like, is that you have a strength coach that does the strength stuff, right? And can focus on his kind of lane. And then you have kind of hybrids where the skills coaches and things like that have an understanding of the exercise psychology, have an understanding of the biomechanics, so that you can do the foundational work as the strength coach. But then when you bring them over to the other person on the staff, they can now integrate the movements with those, that base strength that you did, and it offers a better product, and it offers, more abilities for the athlete to get better at their craft.
Really good point. And that's constant communication with the skill coaches. Here is what I'm doing, and here's why. Okay. I'm hoping, and you got to say hope, because we're never guaranteed, no matter how perfect we apply a protocol, that translation is going to be there. We're pretty confident about it, right? But sometimes I see a lot of people, strength coaches and performance coaches, in fighting, and I look at it and go, boy, you're unequivocally stating how this is going to translate. We hope so. We think it should. We can make rational assertions that it will translate. But that communication with the skill coaches is, hey, here is what I'm trying to build. What are your thoughts? We are doing these movements, so when you ask your athlete to do A, B, and C, all the requisite qualities are there to improve that. I'm not telling them how to apply the skill. I'm giving them every tool. So you and I are building the Formula One car, right? We're the chassis, making it fuel efficient. We're making the hull lighter but stronger, and we're telling the driver, wow, this car is going to be awesome, because when you do turn, it's going to turn faster. You're going to get better fuel efficiency. You're going to like how tight the steering wheel is. That's what we're doing. We don't literally teach them the driving, but by building their confidence in their car, which is their body, of course, we're building their confidence in their ability to race. So my point to that is, there's a driving coach, but we're the engineer. And we bring that over to the driving coach. Here's what I did to your car. Now you teach them how to drive it, right? And that's the back and forth I go. If I'm doing something in wrestling, for example, for a Division I program, and Cale Sanderson comes up to me, Penn State, one of the greatest wrestlers in American history, and says, I don't think that's very good. You know what? I'm going to listen to him. All right. How many national titles has Penn State won in the last 10 years? And how great of a wrestler was he? It may not mean everything he's telling me to do, I'm going to throw out the window. But that's part of immersing yourself in it and becoming a better. That's why I like the word performance coach as opposed to strength, because we are incessantly integrating a host of different things to make the athlete better.
Yeah. It's all about the performance, but in order to get the best for the athlete, we have to understand all of it, and I think people sometimes don't like that aspect, or they just want to do the gym stuff, and you can't do that, because just like you say, if somebody comes up and says who's an expert in their field or knows what they're talking, that's not going to work. It's not going to happen, especially with the Formula One scenario. I just watched Rush with Nicky Lavo and James Hunt, so all about that. But like I said, we're building a car, and then we're telling them how to drive it, but the skills coach is going to explain to them what to do in the car during the race.
That's
and then
exactly right.
And then moving down the line, the driver's by himself in the car driving on the track.
Right.
Exactly. So it's all about, there is this thing, there is some control, but at the end of the day, they're the athlete and the skills coach are going to be there on race day, if you will. And then the driver is going to be there by himself driving when everything counts. So I think that integration is a staple. I think we have to completely get away from just strength. It's performance. You're a full-on, what do they need? I need to do this. And then if a skills coach tells me what to do. I need to kind of navigate that. But I think, you brought it up before, and I continue to, the communication has to be there, because we also have to get away from the skills coach in an ivory tower telling the strength coach what the athlete needs.
Well, you know what? You hit that beautifully too, because that does happen.
Yep.
That's another fair point.
Because now we have well, I want them to do this and you're going to do that, right? It should be an even, right? He needs this. Okay, these are the exercises I'm going to use to get there. We do that for a few weeks. Okay, skills coach, what do you think? And we go back and forth that way, but we're on the same line. Hey, he's not very good at, let's just say, bridges, right? He's not good at weighted hip thrust. So by you killing him and having him train on his back all day, that might not be the best for him, because he's already poor at your basic biomechanical level in the weight room.
Yes. These are the assessments you have to make. Mm-hmm. And that is wonderful, because that's the performance umbrella, right? So, strength performance includes the strength, the assessment, the making the best determination you can about the individual needs, the ability to build the confidence, the ability to briefly communicate, even if you're not an expert on the nutrition side, the sleep side, how what we're doing as a whole will make them better in their skill set. So I'm excited that we've taken, I've been using the word performance for a long time, because I never wanted to get caught up in strength quality is wonderful. It's fantastic. It needs to be there, but it doesn't solve all. And sometimes we hear that saying, keep it simple, stupid, but sometimes that's stupid, because keeping it too simple doesn't solve everything. Or at least maybe if it doesn't solve everything, I shouldn't always say we have to solve something. It doesn't augment everything. There may be other things you can do to make them that better athlete. And I'm excited that people like you now are viewing it in that greater context, as opposed to the simple concept, strength solves all. It's wonderful. It's foundational to almost every quality that you need. But simultaneously, once it's established, then what? Now we got a whole new agenda on our hands.
Yeah, I think it's a constant. You have to constantly move with your athlete. And I think there's where we get stuck, because we talk about the Russians again. They took care of all that stuff back in the day, but then you have the little parts that people don't really, you take the Bulgarians, right? Yes, they're 1 rep max every 6 hours or every 3 hours worked, but at the same time, everybody forgets that they lived in a big house. You did that for 3 weeks. If you got hurt, they would just pack your stuff and then somebody else would show up, and then they would document the things that actually work. So not to say that it didn't work, but there's this constant, I want to take this one program and just use that because it worked, without taking the outside parameters where it was. And then at the same time, we have to grow with the athlete. Once we develop the foundation, now we have to go do something else to get them better. And I think it's that constant building that some people, and not say all, and not to, but some people don't follow along with that. And that's where you get stuck in your ways of trap bar, shoulder press. And we get stuck in those things because they originally didn't want to they wanted the simple, right? But you realize it's not simple. This is, I think, in terms of the performance, it's one of the most complex jobs that there are, because you just said we do it nutrition. We deal with psychology, which we'll get into in a little while, which I think is 90% of anything, because if the kid's not up there, you're not going to get him to do anything. It doesn't matter how much he deadlifts. You're doing the performance stuff. And then we have to deal with relationships and energy, and all those things in combined. So I think that's one of the lagging things now, is you have performance, and everybody coming into the field now understands that word, but some of the older people in the field are still stuck on that strength part. And if you don't grow with the athlete, it's only hindering the athlete. And not to say it's on them either. That's how they learned. We talked about, growing up and stuff. There wasn't a lot of access, and Arnold and Lou Ferrigno and all those people were the people you looked at. But now with the emergence, I think that it's very important to go. But I will say also, just to end, is that there is a lot of information out there now. So I think that is also overwhelming. There's a new piece of equipment and there's a new program every 5 minutes.
Right. And the point too, and I like that, that's great that you brought that up. Excuse me, I have a bit of a sore throat. So that new piece of equipment, that new training tactic may be very good for a certain athlete at a certain point. but it's not as comprehensive as everyone would like to think. In better words, here is the only training protocol, or this particular stimulus unequivocally is going to give the best result, right? And this is only or how we should be taxing the neuromuscular system. We have to get rid of that. And in various sports, any single action you can think of, isometric, whether it be for short duration, eccentric, concentric, right? At every angle possible, at different durations, with different bioenergetic demands, with rest periods and starting again, depending upon the sport. My point to that is every quality is needed. So we also do fall into that. Here's how you train. You do this particular approach. You do, 4-second eccentric, 2-second iso, only keep the joint angle here and we're done. And in most cases, that may be foundational for good strength and stability. But then you have to augment further because to prepare the athlete for the host of different stimulus. And most of them are unpredictable. You know that they're going to happen. As a running back, you're going to have to cut, you're going to have to turn, but you don't know when, and you don't know how, and you don't know who's going to come from where. So I just don't ever want to get into this concept that A is best or B is best. There's an old saying, everything works, nothing works for long. And I think something is best at a given point, and then the goal changes, and then maybe it has to be applied again later on down the road. So it is, to some extent, we use science. We can measure where improvements are and say, okay, we don't need this quality as much now as we need this quality, but the time may come, you may have to revert back to augmenting that other quality again. So that's the idea, that everything can be helpful. Some of the art, if you don't have absolute measurements, is knowing where and when to put something in there and read the athlete.
Yeah, I think with, people listening out there, the more of what he just said is that you need to, because there's so much out there, you need to be able to say, okay, I use this technique to get this result. I use the other technique to get this result, and I use this technique to get that thing. And those are your baselines. Not to say that they change, but I think that's a better approach as opposed to, well, we used Russian training 2 years ago, but we don't use that anymore. If it works, as you said, everything works. If it works, you don't have to go away from it. You can use one or two things and it's okay. I still like deadlifts. I'm not a big heavy squat person because of the risk reward thing, right? Huge on plyometrics, awesome on bands, right? Louis Simmons stuff I love within certain parameters, especially in preseason. But the point I'm making is being able to say, okay, this is what I use. I know in my head because I've used it. That's another thing. Make sure you use it, you understand it. But if I can use the basic, let's just say squat, deadlift, press, those foundational movements, and that's what I know will get me ready for my athletes training in whatever sport I'm training them in. Then as we move closer to the skill, now I can use something else that I know helps build power output and doesn't take away from the skill, and we continue to push. And I think that's important as opposed to either A, getting stuck on one entire, foundational thing, right? Louis Simmons is a genius in developing power output and getting guys ready. But then after that, he doesn't have to teach a sport, right? He just gets them ready and then, he does different things. But you can't use Louis Simmons' stuff all the way through in a baseball season. But we can use his stuff in the 3 weeks we have in preseason with overspeed eccentrics in order to get them to max power output. And we can use some of his things within the season to make sure that testosterone level continues to rise with little volume so we don't have muscle shearing, right?
Exactly.
So the point is that you can, don't be afraid to use a lot of stuff, but also, if something works, you can go back to it and go around and around. Right now, if you have something that gets improved, obviously we make changes. But the point is, don't pigeonhole yourself because we're growing every day, but we can also go back to 1960 and use the stuff the Russians used.
Yeah. And that there is a part of an art to that. Nothing rarely is something completely abandoned, right?
Welcome everyone to the Strength Coach Experience, episode 25.
I'll give you an example.
One
you
quarter
do
of
that
100.
in the assessment.
Let's
So
do
if
it,
I get a person in fight sports
be sure
and
to
they were a
subscribe
Division
and follow us on
One
Instagram
wrestler,
for always updates on the
and they
podcast.
wanted D1 at a high level and an All-American in a Big Ten program. Well, what do I know about them? They've been moving other human beings their whole life. They probably in a D1 Big Ten program had an excellent strength coach. They had access to athletic trainers, usually, maybe even a little bit of a dietitian, whether they used them or not. And their head wrestling coach knew how to get them strong and fast and get them in condition. So hence, I'm not going to utilize and go into that the same way I might go into the stand-up kickboxer from Europe who never had formal strength and conditioning, never had a formal like Division I program and education about it, and hasn't been on the ground yet. My point to that is that the needs are going to be very different. So we're going to select tools based upon those needs. I might say that stand-up kickboxer may need more of Louis' work as an example. And the wrestler now coming into MMA that really wants to improve their stand-up skill set may be doing something much more like we see a wide receiver doing as an example, or much more time on the feet. Or I might have them doing loaded hip thrusts vertically now. So there's different things. Just so my point to that is, let's not discount the specificity in sport. The specificity doesn't mean I'm making them punch with dumbbells in their hands. The specificity means I'm being cognizant of, are they a shot putter? Or do they have other bioenergetic demands and need replicable power? Or what is their strength in what they do? And can I augment their weakness? That's what we do. And that's the art of it all, right? And we have all tools. And that's what you pointed out. There are a host of different methods that we can use, and the methods are here, and we take our athlete and put him here, then put him there, and then put him there. Yeah, it's a great option. It's wonderful.
Yeah, the assessment, I think there's a lot of, not controversy, but there's a lot of misunderstanding because, just my opinion, you have the FMS, right? Great tool. But now if we're testing somebody with an FMS, right, we're only testing them based on the guidelines of somebody else. Now, you might have somebody who's a great MMA fighter, right? They check all your boxes as a skills coach, performance coach, but they fail everything on the FMS, right? So now we get into a issue where, but they're broken because they didn't score well on the FMS, but they're still good at their sport. So I think the point I'm trying to make is when we do assessment, it's a needs analysis. It's me as a skills coach, as a performance coach saying, okay, he moves this way, and I know this is what he needs, or this is from my experience, what it looks like to move like a professional or somebody who's going to make it. And that's what I'm looking for in my assessment. And I think one of the things is we get caught up on these sometimes with the assessments and these different protocols that are written by somebody else who doesn't train, let's just say, MMA fighters. And it hinders you because now you're over here trying to figure out or trying to fix why their left glute doesn't fire when they squat, or why can't they lunge in an inline, when in reality, it works for them, or that pattern works for them in MMA. I mean, I bring it up all the time. You have people that will do a T-spine test, right? Rotational things of that sort, and they'll do it on pitchers. And their one side goes all the way to the ground, the other side doesn't. And then they want to pull apart the other oblique. And I'm like, wait a second. The reason why that oblique is tight on the other side is because he throws 96 miles an hour. Exactly. And that's internally, we can't mess that up. So, not to say assessments are bad. I support them 100%. They're great with all the work, but I just wanted to bring up that make sure your assessment is based on your needs analysis and what the athlete needs for, what they're doing. Because you did bring up the assessment stuff.
No, you're right on. To me, I look at the assessment and just go, okay, is there, based upon the dysfunction, are we looking at a potential overuse injury? Can we do a couple of things to help that? That's all, right? Mm-hmm. If I've got a fighter who's very can't do the overhead squat, right, very nicely, and the arms are forward and they're in torso flexion as an example, and I do see, okay, well, you know what? They are quite protracted. So I do need to strengthen middle trapezius. That's valuable, right? Hey, that's only going to augment their performance in the long run, because that kind of having those antagonists to be stronger would be advantageous. So that's where it comes in to me. Not like, oh, well, they failed at this, so that means they're not good. No, just take a look at it. We do that movement. All right, we better build that up a little bit, because if they throw 70,000 more punches this year, we may have an issue. And that's how I see the assessment, right? How can we just make sure, while trying to augment performance, we're keeping things just in the most optimal alignment to make sure that repetitive stress injuries would be minimized to the best extent too. And that's not complicated. If there's severe joint dysfunction, I send them to my camp, a great physical therapist, right? If there's little things, like I said, they're highly protracted and need to get some retraction work in, good. We warm up. We do that. We finish with a couple exercises after we're done. And that's the context in which I see assessment. But you can, to your point, I can watch them within their skill set and know if that problem's going to exist. Even though they're great, hey, can we help them a little bit? That's where we're going to go. Is there anything we can do to just make them a tenth of a second better, as an analogy?
Yeah. And the other thing is, everybody has to remember you always have an independent variable in training, right? You just brought it up. He's going to throw 70,000 punches this year. So if he has a scapular dysfunction, we have to fix that, because either way, whatever we do, he's going to throw 70,000 punches, right? So I think that's another thing that sometimes gets missed, because you can't get rid of what he has to do, right? Somebody swings a lot. Their obliques, they have an oblique tear history, let's just say, because they can't ground the pelvis and they swing open, and they're stretching the external oblique as they come through. But regardless of that, they're still going to have to swing. So I think that one of the things is always those variables. You have a fighter that comes in, he could be a mess, but at the end of the day, he's going to throw 70,000 punches. He's going to throw 20,000 kicks. So it's your job to not only have surrounded the staff that can help, but also take what he has to do and get him better at that. And it might not always be by the book, but that's why we continue to talk about immersion. How can I make this person who's got some, joint articulation issues and things going on, what is the best way that I can fix that, but I can still have him in a way so we can throw 70,000 punches this year and we don't have to pull him all the way back and break him all the way down.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And you brought up the best point. It's going to happen. All right. Yep. We're not stopping it. So what's the handful of things we might be able to do to help it? Exactly right.
Yep, exactly. So we've been touching on it. We've been talking about it, Tony. I just want to go over, if somebody walks in, what's a typical training session for you look like? Just to break down.
Well, to give you an example, I usually, the good thing is with a lot of the fighters, as an example, Joe, I have a history with them, so I know what's going on, right? I know if historically they've been a striker, if they've been a wrestler. I watched a lot. So I live in fight gyms, and that's where I do my work, and because I like fighting and I'm a big fan. So I think a lot of it has to do with, okay, sitting down, talking to them first, their goals, their aspirations. Why did they come to me? What's their intent? That is number one. I have to hear from them. Well, I want to do this. I want to be, if it's just, I want to be stronger. Okay. But stronger for what? So we sit down, I go into great depth. Normally I'll contact the skill coach first, but I will know historically, are they a good striker? What do they do? Are they fast? Do they got a great tank? Can they throw 1,000 punches but not knock over a milk carton? Can they put a hole in the Hoover Dam but only throw 2 punches? Like, these are the things that I am looking at. What are the qualities that they excel, and where maybe we be able to augment? And I will do a little bit of postural assessment to make sure things are generally firing good, taking a look, maybe a couple of movements that are FMS or overhead, or watching their stance, right? If they're put them in fight stance. And so I'm going to do a little mechanical assessment. They have excessive lateral rotation of their right thigh and they're an orthodox fighter. How much time am I potentially losing when my foot is facing this way on a jab or a right hand, and I got to throw a punch this way? So little things. Oh, maybe we'll work on this. It's a general assessment to see if I can structurally help improve some things first. Then what we'll do, I'll always start someone to assess if they have the basic, we might do hex bar deadlifts, a few basic lifts, so I can assess their experience with resistance training. How good are they? Are these movements, can they do them effectively? Right? So we'll do a hex bar dead. I do mechanically the movements that can provide the most strength, that are most simplistic. And a hex bar dead is gold for me because I don't have a lot of time, as you know, and they're already beat up from 3 sessions a day, and they don't have to master a sumo if they don't have time, nor a conventional. So it's something that works really good. So they'll come in, and usually I'll start with an assessment of the strength movements that I might use the most. And I'll put them through the hex, look at mechanics, put them through the Zerker, see how that's working. Sometimes I do use the good morning and barbell row because I'm a posterior chain fanatic with my sports due to the fact that everything is such anterior overload. So that's how it works. It's a little bit of a strength session. Then I'll go over film with them. Oh, I need more speed. I'll watch the way they move. I'll talk to the skill coach and then start deciding on what qualities I think they need most, right? Fighting's very different because, and to your point, this is why you got to immerse yourself. If you're doing plyometrics with, that are activating the stretch shortening cycle through 90 degrees at knee flexion, then exploding, that doesn't happen in boxing as an example, right? Fighting is so hard because everything you mechanically need to move effective has been taken away from you. So if I want to go to point A to B, one of the most important things I can do, I can use contralateral propulsion with my arms, right? I can't do any of that. My hands are here. I move very differently in fighting. So what I'll do is to watch film with them, see how they move in and out. All right. See how they are on the ground. Are they an easy takedown or stuff like that? And then start developing the specificity of a program according to what they need. I do foundational movements. I'll keep them strong with the aforementioned ones. A lot of things I do barbell row, maybe a little bit of the RDL, hip hinge, hex bar, okay, maybe a Zerker squat if I'm going to do a squat at all. All right. So therefore, we do those movements so I know what foundational strength movements I have that I can use with them that's going to work without taxing their joints. Remember, fighters come in and everything's already broken, so you have a lot of limits. Then after I know some of the strength movements, I'll start to look at what are the other qualities that we need to augment. Are they really strong with no explosion? Are they really fast, moving in and out beautifully, but with not enough power? Okay, these are the things. And then we talk to the coach and develop the program according to those lines. It's the only time it's very similar is if the athlete is 20 and has had no formal training for performance. Well, then they're going to need something basic and foundational. But if they've had a lot of training before, there are a lot of things I'm going to bypass to make sure that I get to what they need the most because we don't have a lot of time. 8 weeks. Sometimes they come to you at 6 weeks, right? Somebody's coming to me 4 weeks before the fight. How much strength work am I going to get in? Whatever strength they have, I got to maximize the rate at which they can develop their force now. So those are the things, it looks according to what the person probably needs.
Yeah, I listening to you, just go through it. I understand why you love it so much and what separates it because with fighting, you're forced to look at them individually. That's their sport, right? In every other sport, a lot of the movements are very similar, right?
Yes.
Every athlete does things almost to the book. Some guys run differently in the NFL. They jump a little different, but it's either 1 foot, 2 foot, both, or something else, right? When you run as a running back, everybody's going to do an inside foot cut, outside foot cut. Right. Those are things that are a staple to the movement. But then, with fighting, you have to sit down and look at their style, and they might not fight like anybody else on the planet or anybody else you've done with, and that we have to take those movements that they already do, and then we have to identify ones that they're not too good at, and we have to try to figure that out with a shorter time frame. So I think, like I said, as you went through that, now I know why you love it so much because it's that every single program is individualized, and every.
It really is, Joe. And that's the art of it. And that's the challenge. And one other important point that you make, the running back generally, prototypically, is going to have comparable qualities to the other running back. 5'10", there are guys who are bigger, but you're right, 205, the wide receiver, 6'3", similar body type. The offensive lineman, right? The offensive tackle, God knows what, 6'6", 345.
6'9", 402, yeah.
But in fighting, I have two completely different bodies with different biomotor qualities in the same weight class. Mm-hmm. You don't really get that. You get that in football on the field when the offensive tackle hits the cornerback. But my point to it is the qualities, generally speaking, in order to make that person good at the position are well established. The tight end has a prototype. The receiver has a prototype. The quarterback has a prototype. Fighter doesn't have a prototype. He could be 6'1", 155. He could be 5'8", 155. That means different fiber types, different training experiences, different cardiovascular capacities, right? Different limb lengths, segment length, different origin insertion. So therefore, that is one of the reasons why the specificity may have to vary. If you were assigned to just be a strength coach one at a time on Mondays with the receivers, on Tuesdays with the linemen, it probably wouldn't look exactly the same, right?
No, yeah, not at all.
So we've got two completely different bodies in the same sport competing against each other. And that's why my prescription cannot be that scaled, because we have to look at that and adjust it accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's why there's such a big variety in fighting, because there's no typecasting, if you will, right? In football, you could be a great tight end in high school, but if you're 6 feet tall, 190, people aren't going to look at you. You know,
exactly.
I think that's a drawback of general sports, because you have to fit a prototypical way, or you're not even going to get looked at, right? At the other end is people assume, or whatever, if you have a certain body type, you're going to be able to be good at this. And I think that's another thing. We'll bring up baseball. Jose Altuve, before the cheating, everybody that was 5'6" was like, oh, I can play in the major leagues now.
Exactly.
I can hit 50 home runs. And I'm like, he's an anomaly. But just to the point is that, I think with fighting, it's such a big sport because everybody can do it, right? If a guy walks into your gym at 6'2", 150, you're not going to say, well, he's too small, big, lanky. It doesn't matter, because it's all based on his skill set.
Right.
As opposed to in football, you could have the best footwork. You could be, faster, jump higher. But if you're 5'10" and you're 180 pounds and you're trying to come out as a wide receiver, strong safety, or a running back not so much, but like let's just say, there's not going to happen. You could be 250, right? Maybe 6'4", and a great defensive lineman, great feet, everything, all your power is forward. You don't even get to sniff any college.
Exactly.
The guys that they want are 6'8", 380 pounds.
It's perfectly articulated, right? And that's why fighting is different. You've got two different species actually going against each other with completely different styles,
like dinosaurs,
and different demands, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that is why I love it, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's like dinosaurs, like I said, right? Raptors fight T-Rexes, but they figured out, right? They have different skill sets. It goes
exactly.
I think it goes back to the basis of human development, right? It's allowing you to do something. It doesn't, your body type doesn't matter. Right now, we talked about insertions, right? Origins, muscle fibers, all that stuff. Those are what separate you. It has nothing to do with what it looks like.
That's correct.
150 at 5'1" and huge, and you might be really fast, no power, or you could be 6'1" with long arms, but you might pack some punch in there. So I think that is very important to take away, that in general, I think we're forced to typecast, if you will, with all the sports, just because somebody somewhere figured out that if you're a lineman, you got to be 6'8" and X amount of time. Now lineman's probably a bad example, because you're going to need some size because they're giant. But to the point, you can be a wide receiver at 5'10", because if you have a 48-inch vert and you run a 4-4 split, we don't even have to worry about it. But those things are overlooked, unlike the sport we've been talking about.
Yes, exactly.
So I want to get into I always want to bring this up, because I see it all the time. Can we go over the band training a little bit? I know that, you've done that for years just because of different things, but just explanation. I watch it all the time. I'm a big advocate of the bands. I just want to go a little bit more in depth of the movements you use with the heavy bands and things like that.
I like to accommodate. Because of the, the load, the varying loads. And a lot of what the band work that I do, Joe, is you'll see it. I use it a lot for footwork. Yeah. My friend Nick Tuminello has the NT Loop band, and I can't speak highly enough about it. There's no promo codes. I don't make money on it. Just a wonderful band. And I like to accommodate that, particularly in stand-up protocols. So where they become very advantageous is, obviously, if I'm looking for horizontal propulsion, just if I want to improve the fighter's ability to explode off their rear right leg and propulse forward, and we do so by resisting. I'll take a band, I'll wrap it around the shoulder as an example, and then have them step on that band. It's very long, and look for forward propulsion. The band will pull them back, overloading the rear leg again that they'll be utilizing subsequent. So there's a small stretch shortening cycle component to it. But where I use the bands in numerous ways is utilizing it mostly for the speed and the change of direction and the capacity to increase and augment propulsion with limited movement. That's what the fighter needs. It's a little bit different. Now, on a wrestling shot, yes, the joints are going into greater degrees of flexion and extension, right? But in fighting, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So I don't sit there and throw punches in most cases. It happens, of course. If you got somebody in trouble, occasionally you feint and you can load up. But generally, if you look at boxing particularly, there isn't a lot of movement occurring for the amount of force that needs to be generated. You have a relatively constant angle of knee flexion. Right now, you have a lot of great rotation. Absolutely. But what is the goal with our bands? Is to maximize our capacity to build force development at angles that you can't exclusively do with a load, right? I can't do that with dumbbells. Unequivocally, now I can preload and do a post-activation, something like that. But those bands allow me to tax the athlete to utilize propulsion in a very horizontal plane when it comes to striking and augment that beautifully, giving resistance not only as the athlete moves into relocation, point A to B, but we are loading on their way back, which augments balance, kinesthesia, their tactile cueing, and their ability to be able to replicate the skill again. Boom. So I just did something on Instagram that shows that, working with a Charlie, who's a really, really good fighter. And what we're working on there is that horizontal propulsion with the bands. They're beautiful for accommodated resistance, so you have load at the end of movements. Love them for that. But the great thing that I love about them is they're going to allow for resistance in angles and vectors that cannot be created with loading. They just can't. And that's the beauty of them. And if you load first and then unload and then do the bands at varying angles, hopefully we're getting the desired effect. Greater recruitment, the capacity to produce greater force, okay, in multi-directional planes, because that's what we need. And we need it, like I said, in many cases, we need it without the augmentation of, just like you would get in sprinting, where the running back has a ball, right arm to move left. We have to move with the hands up in most cases if we're in range. We don't have that benefit. We have to slide close to the ground because vertical propulsion, unless we're throwing a knee, all that does is give the opponent more time to react to what you're doing and see what you're doing. So if I'm propulsing upward and my opponent's here, now what are they doing? They're reading it. I'm delaying more time in the air, and it's longer to get there. So those bands for me, not only for the accommodated resistance and strength, we got that, to help build the rate of force development, excellent. To overload eccentrically when the time comes, if you want, great, beautiful for that. But the value for me is to provide force or resistance against the athlete in vectors I just cannot do in any other approach. Now you might say, well, they do that in, why are you moving this way? Why are you moving that way? They're doing that in skill. Of course they are. But that's the point. I want to increase and enhance the qualities that allow them to move, to apply that skill. And that's largely why I love the band so much. The multi-directional applications.
Yeah, they're, like I said, they're great. And I think it's important you bring up in fighting that seems to differ from everything else is in every other sport, there's a load, right? There's I think you can maybe compare it to a running back going through a hole because there's not a lot of counter movement options there.
Right.
They have a split second to go, but when you're hitting, when you're pitching, we have that ability to take the time to load and then come through. So what you're doing in essence with the bands is you're teaching them how to create force in a short span of time from almost an isometric balanced platform, because not only, because if I'm in a fight and I throw a punch, right, I have to be able to come back and load again because somebody else is going to be throwing a punch at me, trying to hit me in the face. So, you know, the difference for everybody that's listening is that usually we have a counter movement and then a go, and it stays all the same, right? When you run track, nobody's trying to punch you in the face after you come out of the blocks, right? But with the MMA and the fighting training, it's, I have to teach you how to create force. You know, Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch. That's a legit thing. It's exactly what he's talking about, is as I come back, I have to balance now because I have to create force again from an isometric standard place without being able to reload.
Exactly. And if nothing else, the other objective is to get the hell out of there once you've been there. So you can't get hit, right? That's the other intent. It's not, it's in. Now, I don't even care if you don't have a Nux response, but get out of there before you eat his response, right? So it's boom, boom, boom. We're in, we're out. We're in, we're out. Okay, maybe we applying the force again immediately, or we're not. But that, you hit it best. The reason why things differ is it's the only sport. Look, we watched, I have a beautiful picture of LeBron James going to the net. He looks like a statue. It's like biomechanically. I mean, I don't know basketball at all. I just know biomechanically. It is unbelievable. Now, what would happen if after 2 dribbles, somebody was allowed to punch him in the face? Everything.
That's how MJ played. That's why there's a difference, because when MJ played, they destroyed him and he still scored 40 points.
You know what? When MJ played, they did punch in the face. Good point.
The Detroit Pistons killed him. LeBron just walks down the lane and dunks the ball. I mean, everybody moves out of the way. I mean,
great point.
You know,
because the Pistons were Lambeer and those guys were evil. Yes.
Exactly. I think that's what the difference is. You know, you have to, you know, we go back into just general training. I talked about it. The concept that everybody tries to use Army training. And I'm like, the difference between football training and the Army is, in the Army, if you mess up, you get shot.
Exactly.
In football, if you mess up, the guy runs for 15 yards. I mean, the difference are so much. And I think that just plays a bigger role, because we talk about in fight sport, if you don't get out of the way, you're going to, you know, you're going to get your teeth busted. You know, things are going to happen. And it's not whether or not, you know, yes, the Army's more dangerous and all that stuff, but in general, you know, we go back to psychology, your body's going to go into fight or flight regardless of how many times you've been punched in the face. Right. So it's being able to augment those responses, because you can't do any kind of training that's, you know, you can get them used to it, you know, get a stronger chin, put them in situations. But, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, but I think every time somebody gets punched in the face, regardless if they're used to it or not, the brain is going to have the same, you know, response with the transmitters and the different adrenal responses.
And you may have that ability. What you might learn to do is quickly override it to the extent to say, because you can say, okay, I understand what's happening. However, to your point, it's that response is going to be there. It's going to be there. Yes. Okay. There's going to come. I mean, it's a physiological response to trauma and a brain being bounced around like a Super Bowl in your skull. And it's going to be there. Now, if it's not enough, you can override it and say, okay, I know what that is, but it's going to take that split second to do it. And it's going to, and within that split second, it's going to make you highly vulnerable too. And you're right. It's still a flight component. If you get hit really hard, it's flight. Even if it's for 1/10 of a second, you may override it with fight, but the original response is shut off and get the hell out of there. Yes.
Yep. Just to go back, when you do, you know, different rest periods and thing in training, do you take into account those spar days and certain things that you do because of the fact that you're constantly augmenting that fight or flight? So if a person has like a hard, you know, spar day, or you know they're going to have a hard session, will you back off some of the strength things and movement stuff just based on that augmented response of the brain?
Without question, Joe. Great question. And without question. And that's what people, when I know they haven't, it's not to insult anyone, when I know they haven't been doing this that long, they'll say, well, if I was their weight cut coach, I would just do A. If I was their strength coach, I would just do A, B, and C. It doesn't work that way. You're 5th, 6th, or 7th on the rung. They've got jujitsu. They've got Muay Thai. They've got sparring. They've got kickboxing. They've got wrestling. Okay? They've got 5 or 6 skill sets that take precedent. And you wanted to do lower body power that day, let's say on a Thursday, Wednesday, they come in and their ankles the same size as their waist. Okay, well, there goes your lower body power day. So you get the schedule, you find the best possible place where you hope you could put in a given quality set you want to train, but you got to be ready all the time, Joe. I mean it, to throw it out the window for that day, because it may be an injury. It may have been they went 2 hours longer than they were going to go the night before, right? Or on overnight, and I'm working with them on Friday, and overnight, a major guy flew in who's going to spar with them on Saturday. Well, I'm not going to put them in there fatigued so that all they're doing is from a biomotor perspective, neuromotor perspective, practicing junk and getting killed, and they're tired and they're fatigued, and that's bad for the head, right? So yes, you are constantly, you can have a plan, but boy, you better be ready to go on the fly. Just like if you have a football plan and they are stuffing your run game, right? You better know what, okay, we got to throw slants. They're blitzing. I got to adjust this. You have a football game, and you have a plan on how you would like to attack it, but you better have a play card in front of you to go to some other things.
Yeah, exactly. And then just to touch on, because I've always been curious, when a guy's cutting weight, right? What sort of things do you do in order to augment the best, building a power development to make sure they're ready, but not to make sure that they don't, they're not getting too tired because of that lack of food? Is it similar to a Louis Simmons thing, or is there a different way in which you approach?
Well, that's a great question. And so if we're fortunate enough to have the athlete, the fighter early, we really start taping down about to unloaded movements, maybe band only, okay, or extremely light, just all footwork, power, explosion, super high rate of force development, unloaded, maybe 3 weeks out if we've had what we needed. And the reason for that is because sparring may even go up, depending upon the skilled coach, Joe. So I would like to say, well, I taper this off or I increase that, but I don't have full control over the camp. So I have to know what they're doing in camp. Some skilled coaches want them sparring super heavy the last Saturday before the fight. So my work's getting really light at that point. We're just rate of force development, firing, motor imagery, exploding, right? Relocation work, utilizing the band, boom, 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 everything in the brain, making sure that all the qualities we worked out are primed with low volume. If there's a skill coach that really tapers them 3 weeks out, which is not the common, then I might, I will really go up into about 2 weeks out. And the other thing this depends upon is you've got to know the athlete. So how far off weight are they? If their energy is pretty good, the body fat's low, it appears the weight cut is going to go quite effectively, I could probably give them a little bit more volume. If they're in the hole and they're well behind, well, under those circumstances, I'm probably going to have to decrease that because I know the cut's going to be far more arduous. So there's a tremendous amount of variables that you have to take into account. That was my point earlier. Well, this is just how I'm going to do the weight cut. Well, that's wonderful. What's happening press week? How many sessions are the skill coaches doing? Are they on interviews the whole time, right? How much training did they have? Are they behind? Was the fight on short notice? You've got to really think about these things. In many cases, you will be cutting your product down to ensure the other products, skill, sleep, interviews, if it's a big fight, and all those other factors are addressed first.
Yeah, no, I figure, but like I said, again, we come back to it, those variables, and you can't do anything about those variables. If you have a guy that gains weight like crazy, you have to do, he has to do more maybe on the cardio, the sparring side. But I also, like you said, the goal is still the same, right? Rate of force production, keep those T levels high, get them everything they need, and that goes back again to what we talk about. Everything is going to change, but you need to have the tool in the toolbox to be able to figure that out. And that is why we never get rid of anything, because you might have somebody, who, needs more power, but they're shot. So maybe we can overload with the band or plyometrics, use dynamic effort stuff, isometrics, things that are low impact on the body, low impact on the brain and the mind, of course, because that's our main concern, and something that is not going to hurt the joints or impact, what they're trying to do.
That is that's the card as the football coach and turning it over. Okay, we're going to run the ball down their throat. Uh-oh. They're stuffing it. I've got 9 carries and a half a yard. Turn the card over. Maybe we better look at some slants, right? Or going downfield or something along those lines, or a screen. Well, that's how you have to be. And that's why knowledge of a multitude of not only the tools you can use, but broadening your knowledge of human physiology beyond just strength application is so important, because if not, you're not understanding the multitude of factors that are going into their ability to perform at a high level. And you might be missing some of the things that you should or shouldn't do as a result of that.
Yep. Full immersion again, you have to do, it's not whether you want to or you should, it's a have to, or else you're going to miss something because there are so many variables.
Yep.
I want to go into, we went through all the training and awesome stuff, into how you got involved in the nutrition aspect. You say you're at school going through the sports performance. Was that something that came after, or was that something you were always kind of interested in from the jump?
Great question. So I have phases. Early phase, ex-phys, strength and conditioning. Later phase, nutrition in my life. And the reason why I went into the nutrition side is when I was younger and lived in Texas, I was in my mid to late 20s. I had a couple of injuries and surgeries that year. I could barely train, but my training volume was very low for the year, but I ate really well. And I have to tell you, I looked by the end of the year, I'm like, I don't really look the same, but I don't look that far off. And my training volume was 10% of what it normally was. And as a result of that, now again, you're talking, this is almost 30 years ago. So I started thinking, wow, this nutrition stuff's probably pretty important too. I knew it was, but until I had and then I figured, if I can't understand everything, I don't have to be an expert in everything, but if I can't understand everything, then I'm not sure if what I do understand matters that much. So it's about having that global picture, right? The sports side or strength and conditioning is the car we're designing. The nutrition is mastering the fuel that is more efficient but more high energy into it, right? And the sports psychology side and mental performance side is, how do you drive this car and drive it perfectly for 3 hours?
Mm-hmm.
Along with skill set too.
And those other two impact directly how we drive.
Exactly. And so that is why I moved into it. I began to realize I better understand it. I don't want to not at least have a reasonable picture of what's going on. And that's why we moved into the nutrition side. And it's wonderful. It's not that complicated. It's really not, right? Eat as many good foods as you can. If you can't eat them because you don't like them, or you have a genetic predisposition, like a lactose intolerance or a peanut butter allergy, all right, we stay away. We find the other alternatives. But it's eat a lot of good food and just try to time it well and get your fluids in and electrolytes in if you lose a lot of fluid. Is it really that complicated? Honestly, it's not. I would almost argue that there are less variables in good dietary practice than there are in all the variables we're talking about in the performance side.
Yeah, you're right, because it's basically what you put on your mouth and discipline, and it's not going to change. If you, like you said, if you're busy for a day, make sure you're prepared, right? Or if you have a day where you don't. And the other thing, we talk about, your body resets every day. So if you screw up Tuesday, we can get back together on Wednesday. I think that's what the most detrimental thing for a lot of people are, with Instagram and lovely social media. You have a day where it's bad, you do good on Monday, Tuesday's kind of bad. And then instead of coming back on Wednesday, you get all bent up about Tuesday, and then everything starts to go downhill. This isn't in the performance side, but I think instead of looking at it like you just put it, right? You eat a lot of good food, and I always talk about it. Everybody knows what healthy is. I love how we have commercials and noon, and not that these aren't bad things, but everybody knows what's healthy. I can walk up to any person on the street and say, "What's a healthy meal?" They're not going to say a McRib and a fudge sundae. It's
no matter what, how educated they've been on it, they get that much. You are absolutely right.
Yep. So, those are the things. I think it's more being able to, I think the education to help, and this is that being able to direct people towards foods that they will like, and then being able to kind of switch those things out in favor of healthier choices, because a lot of trainers in general, you go to the private sectors, a lot of people, okay, I have a client, you're going to go from, drinking 3 cups of coffee, 9 donuts, and we're going to eat spinach for breakfast, or we're going to have an egg white omelet with peppers. And I'm always like, that's great, right? Your head's in the right place, but they're not going to do that. You have to say, why don't we go with 2 cups of coffee and 1.5 donuts? And as we go from there, we kind of break down. I think that's a misconception. People go out and do nutrition and they want to impact nutrition. And then they say, okay, we're going to go over your diet. What do you eat? And it's, oh, we're just going to take out your donuts and your iced coffee and your
not happening
Frappuccino mocha, right? And now we're just going to drink water and eat a veggie omelet. I mean, my favorite client, I just want to bring it up. I asked him the food diary once, and his whole week was beautiful, right? Salmon, rice, avocado, grams, great. Friday at 5:00, he wrote 9 wings, 8 Miller Lights. Saturday, 3 cheeseburgers, 10 Miller Lights, and Sunday, plate of nachos and 12 beers. And I said, this is the greatest food log I've ever read.
The honesty is what I love, though, at least.
Yep, exactly. So, back to the point, though, it's just, I think as we talk about nutrition, it is extremely simple, but it's being able to present it in a way that it's going to last, right? It's much like training.
You just hit it. Now, when I said it's simple, the principle is simple. Mm-hmm. Running a marathon is simple. We all know how to run. Doing it for 26.2 miles is extremely hard. Okay? Yep. If we all have to run to save our life, we know how to run. Mm-hmm. Doing it, that's how nutrition is. Okay? How do we do it to the best of our ability over 26 miles? Not as a sprint. And you hit it. But generally, we know what to do. But how to do it is the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. What do you think, in your opinion, all your experience, what are one of the hardest things or the basic things that you deal with a lot in nutrition? Like, what are some of the main problem when you have somebody that comes in and wants to change their diet?
I think that I just think it's really, to be honest with you, it does require, Joe, it requires the same effort to an extent and planning that other goals do. In better words, it's just a real failure to plan. And I don't mean that it means cooking 20 chicken breasts at the beginning of the week for the week. I just know what you're going to have available, where you're going to be, and when you're probably going to get it. So it's about a little bit of planning. Hey, tomorrow, okay, I got to get up early, so I'll just have the yogurt. Or I'm going to run out of the house, but that store next to work has a protein shake I could get. It's because you know what you have to do. Planning to do it is essential, because if you don't, undereating is always going to lead to overeating. The longer durations without food, the more difficult it becomes to make wise choices. So I think the bigger problem is not so much always, and let's be honest, with many athletes, they can cheat. I tell them, if you're a young athlete playing football in high school, I don't need you to be perfect. You can have ice cream, you can have some pizza, but don't let that replace what you need. You need some chicken, you need some rice, you need vegetables, right? So what I try to tell them is, hey, just try to find a way to where, when, and how you can put those decent meals in. And, they're not always going to taste great or be your first choice, but that's okay. Unless you're doing a weight cut, everybody has room for a little bit of fun. If you eat all day good foods, you can have a treat at night, and it's not going to do anything. And people will ask me, is a cheeseburger bad, Tony? Well, I don't know. for dinner. Oh, can I have a cheeseburger for dinner? Is that bad? I have no idea. What'd you have for breakfast and lunch? If you had biscuits and gravy for breakfast, a pizza for lunch, then the cheeseburger's bad. But if you had oatmeal and some eggs, breakfast, you had chicken and rice for lunch, you know what? Your cheeseburger's not that bad. So I try to get them to see the balance. I negotiate and say, if you get me what we need, I can work with you on what else we can have. And it's that type of planning that I try to adhere to. And the other thing I'll ask from them is, look, give me 3 foods you love and you can't live without. I'm going to put them in your diet. But don't eat, if you don't like potato chips, then don't eat them just because they're there, because that's a cheat. If you like ice cream and you've had 2 or 3 really good days of eating in a row and you've trained hard, well, having ice cream on the 3rd day is not a cheat. That's a treat. But if you put a bunch of stuff in your body that is no good for you and you don't even like it, now we've cheated. So, I try to negotiate with them too and make sure they realize this is not torture. Very few athletes exist without room for some fun. But if you get me what you need, I'll give you what you want strategically and allow us to make progress accordingly.
Yeah, I love you brought up the word torture. I feel like everybody that does a diet or commits to go to somebody to get their diet changed, they look at it as torture because why? Something you brought up, those parameters. You're going to eat this thing, you're going to eat this, you're going to eat this, you're going to eat this, and don't screw it up. And I think that A, there's pressure. B, most of the time they don't have that conversation of what can't you live without? Cheese, bread, sauce, whatever. And so that's not in there. So there's no downtime. And then now, so you have pressure on eating things you don't like or you don't even know you like. And then you're getting rid of all the things that are comfortable to you. And now you're worried about certain things. So I think that's great. If you have good meals, 2, 3 good meals, 1 bad meal is a bad. If you have all bad meals, we got to do something, right?
Yep.
Or gradually doing it and kind of taking that fear away, because it's not for the person giving you the diet. It's for your own, well-being. And I think that's very important. It's the whole thing surrounding the torture is that, well, I have to do it for this person because then they're not going to be happy. And then I have to do all these things I don't want to do, instead of looking at it as I have to make these choices for myself and my family. Right. And I have to, okay, so what I'm going to do, okay, I usually eat 4 crappy meals a day. Let's try to eat 1 tomorrow. And throughout the week or throughout a month, let's alleviate those crappy meals and turn them into 3 good meals and 1 bad one.
Exactly. It's almost ping pong, Joe. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'll give you a little, you give me a little back. I'll give you, you know what I mean? It's not, it's a balance. And you hit it earlier perfectly as to where you said, I can't in one day, okay, I'm going to change their whole diet. No, let's make some improvements. Let's get better. You don't have anybody walk into the fitness center, the gym, or a fight gym and expect to throw a 4-punch combination beautifully at first. Well, nutrition is a practice. They don't have to master it. Yeah, we want to get results right away. Of course we do. Yeah, we want them to have the best energy available. But anything in the right direction is better than the wrong direction. So we make, staggered improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. It's all about staggered improvement. And I think that is a word that gets lost with everything going on, right? Because everybody now goes to a performance facility instead of a gym. Everybody, has a nutritionist or tries to follow a book. I love the books because they're ridiculous. You have these kids online that, they're 20 years old and they're in phenomenal. Oh, this is what I eat. Do this, do this, do this.
Exactly.
And I think the biggest problem with these things is that you have to understand, A, who you're getting them for and what your goal is. I don't think people know how to properly assimilate goals. I love what you said with the nutrition. It's a process like a workout. On Monday, I'm going to go train back. So I'm going to do a vertical pull. I'm going to do a horizontal pull. I'm going to do some stuff for the rhomboids and the trap muscles. And I'm going to round it out with some low back stuff, and some glutes to help the posterior chain, but not take away from the other thing. Nutrition's the same way. On Monday morning, I'm going to get up. I'm going to have a half a cup of oatmeal. I'm going to have 3 egg whites. 2-3 hours later, I'm going to have lunch, some salad, some chicken, but planning those things on a daily basis, much like your workouts. Instead of saying, for the month, I'm going to eat celery and drink a bottle of water for every meal, because I don't think you can,
you forecast day by day, Joe. Mm-hmm. That's all. Hey, you know what? Tomorrow I'll be here. Joe said I should get in a little protein. Here's how I'm going to get. That's it. All right. It's not full-time meal prep. It's making the best possible choices and always tying it to performance, right? When I eat a piece of swordfish, I eat it because I know what it's going to do for me. Mm-hmm. The food should represent not what somebody told you to eat, but how does it tie to what you want to do, right? Omega-3 is good for my brain, keeps me lean. The omega-3s are good for the myelin sheath, the nervous system, maybe keep my speed as an ogre. I rationalize it that way. How does that food represent your goal? And then, hey, I'll go get a cookie later. You can go have one, but don't dare cheat yourself of what you need first.
Of course, get the fuel in. Just because we touched on, you brought it up, for anybody listening and they're interested, what do you think are certain supplements and things that people shouldn't go without, that should be staples kind of in their diet that's away from food? Because I know a lot of, there's a lot of supplement questions out there. There's people, you can get everything from food, you don't need subs, or you can take
good question. As a matter of fact, I'm
the entire aisle at the pharmacy. So
in a few moments, I'm actually going to go travel to do a consult on this with a fighter, this very question. So I would say this, look, we don't need 20 of them. Certainly there are things we could use, look, from a health perspective, I think we know vitamin D has been established as something most of us can take, right? So how can we go wrong there? But from a performance perspective, Joe, for 30 years, people have been trying to prove creatine harmful and failed. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's neuroprotective. It mitigates inflammation, post-trauma. I mean, we could go on, forget about even strength and power. We're past that. But creatine is staple. Having your whey protein or vegetable protein, if you want, but having the essential amino acids readily available at all given times. Okay? They've got to be there in case you can't get to that protein, right? If you're an athlete.
So your branched chain aminos, make sure they're readily available if you can't get to the protein.
That's right. That's all. Have your protein powders or an essential amino acid supplement. Or I don't care if it's a hemp protein, a vegan protein, all good. The other option there, if you are a sport that has replicable power demands, basketball, American football, certainly fight sports, beta-alanine unequivocally. A wonderful supplement for buffering. Right? What we get that elevated pH due to anaerobic respiration. And I love those three. I'm a fish oil proponent. I think it has a lot of both cardiovascular and neuroprotective benefit, good for overall health. So those are probably, because I can't get people to take 5 or 6 different things, right? But those are the big ones. Whey protein, creatine. If you're training really hard and you want to throw in a little glutamine, can't hurt, can't go wrong. But I can ask somebody also to spend $80 a week and then take 5 or 6 different things when they're already got a lot. So that's where I'm going. Creatine, your complete protein's essential, whether it's vegan or whey or casein.
So that doesn't matter whether it's an animal protein or a hemp. In the grand scheme of things,
with animal, you need less. Okay. Yeah, I mean the PD-SAS, protein digestibility corrected amino acid scores, right, are just higher. In better words, it's simple. There's more essential amino acids in a whey protein than there are in a pea protein. So you got to take more pea protein. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you got to be cognizant of that. Okay. And then on top of it, the beta-alanine, wonderful. Some fish oil for overall health. And maybe now I'm become very big on the vitamin D because I think it's immunoprotective. We're seeing that, right? And not just because of COVID, but we're seeing its importance in overall health, bone health, potentially in lipolysis, beta oxidation, the utilization of fatty acids. So I think supplementing with vitamin
D. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and be sure to follow us on Instagram for all the latest updates on the podcast.
Like on Nordic Naturals has both. You can get a vitamin D with cod liver oil. Not that everybody loves it, but I tell you what, you'll do yourself some good.
Yeah, and there's no ill effect. There's no the absorption's still the same if you buy combined fish oil and vitamin D as opposed to. Okay.
Yep, that's a great question. The bioavailability looks equally good. Yep.
And then if I were to take all those together, too, the bioavailability would be the same.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yes. If you had to, I mean, certainly if you took them throughout the same day, definitely.
Okay.
The fish oil, because and the vitamin D as a fat soluble vitamin, always better with a meal, right? Any fat soluble vitamin usually is. The whey protein, great, pre or post. Little casein at night if you want. Creatine, I mean, more so for religious perspective, meaning taking it at the same time every day to ensure you take it. And beta-alanine it's a residual effect of loading over time. So as a result of that, you would take that, in any given time during the day, but after a couple of weeks, it should build up.
Yeah. I think it's great. You brought up the timing, right? We've been talking about the training, the nutrition, the timing, the medicine, the vitamins. The biggest thing I think to keep everybody on path is make sure you take your supplements at the same time, right? Try to make sure we eat at the same time. Exactly. If we have a curveball, if tomorrow we're going to be running out of the house, we have to prepare for it. And I think to encompass all of it, it's just you have to prepare for stuff. And you have to understand what your day is going to do. If your day's a mess, you have to diet for a mess, right? You can't take apart or take away from the same independent variable that we talked about in training. Exactly. If your day's a disaster, you have to plan your diet around a disaster and take your supplements. If you're training and you're not, if anybody listen, if you're not an athlete and you're not training for that, but you want normal gains, you still have to say, okay, I'm going to work 7 to 7 at the office. When I go to the gym for the hour, what am I going to do, or what's best for me, right? And even if you don't have a trainer, you don't have access to things, when you're deciding what regimen to follow, when you're looking up different research on your own, make sure that it's stuff you can do, right? The 2-hour double split, upper body and back workout twice a week, a 3-day split with a day in the middle is not going to work for you if you're an exhausted person that works 12 hours and can barely already get to the gym already, and why I'm on the topic with building patterns, to talk about that. If you're a person who hasn't gone to the gym yet, or this stuff is very overwhelming, the biggest thing is to make sure just go to the gym, right? On the lowest level, and we'll talk about psychology in a second, Tony, but just go to the gym and walk around. Even if you walk around for 10 minutes, get in your car and go home, we're downloading the pattern of going to this place every day, right? Walk on the treadmill, whatever you want to do, but eventually that 10 minutes will turn into a half an hour. And I think the biggest part is don't put constraints on time, what I have to do, or how long I'm supposed to stay there. What we're trying to do in the beginning is to add time, right? Add a pattern of this is what I get up now when I eat this. I get up now, I take this supplement. I go to the gym at this time, and I stay for X amount of time to develop those patterns.
Yep, that's laid out, and it's a little bit, like I said, that even comes down to what we talked about on the food. It doesn't have to, there is some liberty there, but it's just a general plan, right? Mm-hmm. Have a framework, and you can write it down, because if you write it down and see it, it's probably going to help. Here's what I'm doing. Here's when I'm going to do it.
Yep, exactly. And then Tony, just to round up, I just want to go to into the psychology. How did you transition into that? And where that's going?
Yeah. So simply on that, what happened, Joe, is over time, I would work with people in fight camps, and they would do everything right. And by every measurable marker, power, speed, endurance, skill acquisition, body, you could not ask for a better camp. And then 3 minutes into the fight, people were sending me texts asking me why they never trained. And I began to realize some time ago, really the mental side of it. And just the brain runs everything, right? And it's independent of how physiologically primed you are at the periphery. If the brain doesn't want to be there, if the brain is distracted, if the brain is hyperaroused with anxiety, the body doesn't perform. It's not that complicated. And I began to realize how much the mindset really works, and not just like it's an attitude thing, with cognitive processing, it's physiology. You change your physiology by how you think, positive or negatively, within reason. I'm not saying you can jump off a building because you think you can fly, but you can significantly impede your performance if you are distracted, worried, ruminate on negative thoughts. We know that. And I began to realize just how we've, not only just from a cognitive perspective, but from a neuroscience perspective, how we have to control the autonomic nervous system. You can take actions to control your physiology. Rhythmic breathing does that. You might think, oh, I don't have control of my heart rate. Well, directly you don't, indirectly you do. I don't have control of my concentration. You do, by focusing on certain things and excluding other distractions. By rehearsing where your mind needs to be the day of an event 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks out, right? So where I'm taking the performance side, mental performance side now, is integrating it to the things you and I do to try to help build a better athlete, but simultaneously understanding it's really pretty simple. And I don't like to use the analogy because the magnitude of it, but we know if we were to temporarily cut the signal off at C4, you're not worried about the stretch shortening cycle anymore, cross-sectional area, right? Cardiorespiratory endurance. The body doesn't work at all. And that's how impactful the mind is, Joe. And that's why I moved to it. You watched and you look at the story of Roger Bannister, people spending 8 to 10 years to break the 4-minute mile, doing everything they possibly can to improve conditioning. Nobody's doing it. He breaks it. Subsequently, numerous people do. Are you going to tell me their physiology improved? No. Their perception of a new rate of perceived intensity of what they could tolerate changed. And hence, that changed their physiology. They were able to run that under that 4-minute mile. So I moved into sports psychology when I realized the periphery is really a product of everything that's going. Yes, it gives feedback to the brain, no doubt. But in the end, the message that comes from the brain will dictate if everything we did in that camp is going to be brought into fruition. And that's why I moved into the sports psychology and mental performance.
Yeah. Love the Roger Bannister story. Like I said, I'm a big Les Brown listener, and he gives a whole 25-minute talk about, I think, 1952. And everybody's trying to break the mile, and he broke it. And then since then, 20,000 people, I believe, have broke a 4-minute mile, including kids in high school since the time, to round up what he said, it's because people didn't know it was possible. And that is the power of the mind, and to bring that up, we've been talking about constantly that variable. If your mind isn't there, you could be in the greatest shape in the world and nothing is going to help you, except on the flip side. Now, you might not have worked as hard physically, but if your mindset is locked in, you're unstoppable. I mean, we just talked about, the boxing stuff. Look at Tyson and Larry Holmes, right? Right? Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson was a monster. He terrified everybody. He used to walk around the ring and, stare people down. They were terrified. And Larry Holmes was predominantly known for, not training hard, right? Being a little soft around the midsection, had a lot of potential, but it wasn't there. And what happened? Mentally, right? His mother died of cancer, I believe, right? The day before
That's right. That's correct. Yep.
And Tyson, not that he was a good psychological, but after Customato died, he was with all his friends. Mentally, he was, I'm just going to go in there and whatever, but he didn't really understand that. And what happens? He gets knocked out. And then, I guess, his career kind of went down the tubes after that. And I think he's one of the greatest heavyweights who ever lived. I
completely agree with you, but you hit it right on. Yep. You hit it right there. And a great, and then we'll go to the Buster Douglas.
Yep.
Early in that fight, Tyson looked like he didn't want to be there.
Douglas, that's it, not Larry Holmes. Sorry, everybody out there listening.
Yeah. We go to that. He didn't want to be there. Yeah. You could tell, you could see it. Mentally, his head wasn't there. His body looked different, and that's what won the fight. He didn't forget how to box. He forgot how to box that night. We know that. Yep. Why? I don't know. It's inexplicable. But it was the first time his mindset wasn't right. But nevertheless, look what the end product was. So.
Yep, exactly. I think for him, it was a fear factor, and somebody showed up that wasn't afraid. And again, it took his whole game out, and everything else was there. And you look at the mental stuff, Customato kept it all together, and then after he left, I think if he didn't die, we'd be talking about him with Mayweather. No, I don't think anybody would have touched him personally. I mean, we talk about the boxing and how it's gone from now to there. That's what I grew up in. When I was, 3-4 years old, it was Mike Tyson. He'd walk in the ring, he'd stare people into, he'd stare people and they disintegrate to nothing, and he'd knock them out in 30 seconds. Yep, exactly. So I think that mental aspect, though, is the biggest thing. And I love the way in which your career is taken, because the mental side is the most important, regardless. Everybody, we try to go over certain things, or a lot of times I think it gets pushed under the rug, but mentally, if you have a person who is mentally strong, the physical stuff matters, but that mental part is huge. You could train for 7 weeks, have the greatest camp in the world, be the most prepared. If you lose it mentally, you're no good to yourself, It
goes in a second, Joseph, in a flash.
Yep.
Everything. I've never seen anything burn out that quick. If the mind isn't there, you hit it.
Yeah, and it's just super important. It impedes everything, and you constantly see it in so many things. I mean, we talk about, I think boxing, one of the things, I think mentally that's a bigger deal because of that combat adrenal gland response we talked about.
Yes.
That's where you see it the most, because you have Roberto Durant, right? You have the story with Tyson Fury, how after he beat Klitschko, his life came apart, for 2 years. And now he's a big advocate on depression. You look at certain things with that, but I think in boxing, the mental aspect, and in fighting, the mental aspect is there, because in football, I think if you lose it mentally, you can still use your gifts. In fighting, where it is a mental game, everything like that, if you lose it or you're afraid, you're useless. There's really no coming back from that. If you
completely agree with that, totally agree with that, and you're going to get reminded of how afraid you are really fast.
Yeah, because somebody's going to
one strike. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think that within the training, is there ways in which to overcome the fear? Say you have somebody who got knocked out really bad. They come in to see you and they're a little afraid or a little hard about getting hit. What are some techniques or things you can do from the mental side?
Unequivocally, there are certainly, there's self-talk that can be written out. There's resume building in which you look at the skills, write down where the improvement has been. But the self-talk statements, affirmations where you reverse what happened, writing them down, using motor imagery to see yourself being hit now in a comparable capacity and coming back. Working through the understanding that the only reason why you got knocked out is because you were there. It's part of the sport. Now, what do we do to improve that? Right? There are many psychological skill training strategies that can take place, a lot of which are written, a lot of which are recited, a lot of which are rehearsed, in order to go through them and rebuild that confidence. Absolutely. There, we could do that's a separate podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be willing to chat on that for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'll save it. So yeah, definitely. I would love to have that psychology
all MST training.
Yeah. Because like I said, in my career, I started off at LIU, as you, my teacher, I would yell at everybody and scream, and I would try to do everything. And then as I got better and as I learned, especially going into professional sports, you can't use punishment. You can't use certain things. And psychology became the best thing in the world, because the kids, there's no fear and there's no respect tactic in professional sports, because they own you, because they make 100 times your salary. Yep. So you have to find other ways in which to train them. And I think, from your standpoint, we were talking about psychologically the athlete, it's also important as your coach, because when you coach, you have to understand how the athletes think, and you have to understand everything that you do as a coach, how they perceive you. If you come in with low energy, they're going to come in with low energy. If you don't take a liking, or you don't ask them certain questions about days when things are not going good, or you can identify I think it's more the ability to identify if a kid comes in and something's going on and he hasn't told you, it's going to make you're not going to be as good of a coach. So the thing we were talking about with psychology is, yes, it's important on the training side with the athletes, but also from the coaching side, you have to be able to read your athletes without them saying a word to you, because you have to be able to get deep inside, because as Tony talks about the affirmations, these things, athletes aren't going to tell you that they're afraid to get hit unless you understand them psychologically and develop that relationship.
Yeah, I'll close out on this, Joe. There's a great show on Netflix called Playbook, and it goes through Doc Rivers and the psychology of coaching.
I watched it with the guy from Chelsea and that woman from South Carolina, right?
Correct. And I watched Patrick Aratoglu, who is Venus Williams' coach.
Oh, yeah, he's awesome too.
Right? Mm-hmm. And what did he say? I have to see what my athletes are thinking. Brilliant. Brilliant. He was never a big communicator. He didn't talk much his entire life. So he communicated and absorbed by listening, hearing, and watching. And you're absolutely right. Being able to feel, from a coaching psychology perspective, it's as important as how you train it in the athlete. No doubt. And being able to step on the gas and step off the gas, and knowing that communicating with that athlete different on different days may matter, for sure.
Absolutely. And you know what, Tony, we'll end with that. And we'll save the rest of the psychology for hopefully another podcast.
Let's do it.
I just want to thank you so much for, I love the conversation. And like I said, I think we could go on for another few hours.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt, Joe. I would love to continue. It was a wonderful show. I do many. I think I've really enjoyed this. I hope that those who listen in find some value in it. And, they can always contact me if they have a question on email or usually Instagram, just to chat about some of this stuff. I'm on that Fight Shape / my last name.
I'll put that out on the podcast Instagram part. I'll tag you in it when I promote it for
fantastic. Yep. Sounds good, my man.
Awesome.
All right, Joe.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and don't forget to follow us on Instagram for all the latest updates on the podcast.